Bill Gates has spent $320 million funding media outlets, not advertising. Funding: CNN, NBC, The Guardian, Le Monde, the BBC. Grants funneled through his foundation to news organizations, journalism schools, and press associations across the globe. Enough money to shape entire careers, from a reporter's education to the outlet that employs them. And that's only what's publicly listed. He's the second largest funder of the World Health Organization, behind only the United States government. He owns 269,000 acres of American farmland, more than any other private individual, purchased quietly through shell companies, while most people did not even know he was buying. He met with Jeffrey Epstein at least 3 times at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse between 2011 and 2013. All of those meetings happening after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from underage girls. When his ex-wife Melinda was asked about those meetings in a televised interview, she said clearly, "I did not like that he'd had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, no." She later confirmed those meetings were a factor in their divorce. On the surface, none of this makes sense. Bill Gates is supposed to be one of the great philanthropists of our time. Climate change activist, global health champion, the man preparing to give away his entire fortune to charity. You see him on stages at international summits, on television defending vaccines, and documentaries explaining how to save the planet. The image is polished, compassionate, wise. But here's the question. Can you name a single person who actually likes Bill Gates? Not respects, not acknowledges his wealth or his influence. Likes. Because somewhere between the 1990s, when he was the Elon Musk of his generation, the young genius who put a computer in every home, and today, something shifted. The public turned. Articles, posts, memes, endless criticism. He's become one of the most distrusted figures in tech, in media, in public health discussions. And the more you follow the money, the more the image starts to crack. Why does a man who claims to champion transparency fund hundreds of media organizations without clear accountability for how those grants are used? Why does someone advocating for climate solutions quietly become the largest private farmland owner in America, buying up property during a pandemic when land prices collapsed? Why does a philanthropist focused on global health meet repeatedly with a convicted sex offender, and then when asked about it years later on PBS, respond, "Well, he's dead, so you always have to be careful"? These are not conspiracy theories. These are documented facts. Court filings, divorce proceedings, investigative journalism from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the BBC. The foundation he built is real. The grants are public. The meetings happened. The divorce confirmed it. But the question no one's answered is why? Why the meetings? Why the secrecy? Why does a man who's given billions to charity have a net worth that's doubled since the year 2000? But to understand why the mask is slipping now, you have to understand how he built it in the first place. William Henry Gates III wasn't born into poverty. He was born into power. His grandfather, James Willard Maxwell, served as president of Seattle's National City Bank and sat on the board of the Federal Reserve's San Francisco district. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, held a position on the executive committee of United Way International, a nonprofit network that decided which charities received funding and how much. His father, William Gates Sr., moved in circles with the Rockefellers and George Soros, one of the most connected philanthropists in the country. This wasn't a family that hoped for success. It expected it. At 13, Gates wrote his first computer program at Lakeside School in Seattle, a version of tic-tac-toe. Computers in 1968 were rare, expensive, and accessible only to institutions or the very wealthy. But Gates had access. And he was good. Good enough that the school paid him to write software to automate their payroll system. But then the money ran out. So Gates and his friends bought time on a different machine, one owned by Computer Center Corporation. They did not just use it. They found a bug in the operating system that gave them extra free time. Free access, unlimited, until the company caught them and banned them from the system entirely. That should have been the end of it. A teenage kid caught exploiting software, breaking the rules for his own benefit. Except, it was not the end. A few months later, the same company that banned him hired him. They wanted him to find more bugs, more exploits. They paid him to do what they had just punished him for, and that was the lesson. Break the rules, but be valuable enough, and you get rewarded. In 1975, Gates saw an advertisement for the Altair 8800, one of the first microcomputers available to the public. He and his childhood friend Paul Allen contacted the company that made it, MITS, and told them they had developed software that would let the computer run programs. It was a primitive operating system, but revolutionary. There was one problem. They had not built it yet. MITS expressed interest. They wanted a demonstration. So Gates and Allen worked for 2 months straight, barely sleeping, building the software they had claimed already existed. When they finally delivered it, it worked. MITS struck a deal. The software would be sold with the Altair 8800. Gates and Allen called their partnership Microsoft. By 1980, the company had grown from a basement operation to a legitimate business. Then came the contract that changed everything. IBM wanted an operating system for their new personal computer. They approached Microsoft in part because Gates' mother knew IBM executives and had recommended her son's company. When IBM's first choice of contractor fell through, Microsoft was ready to step in. The contract was not massive financially, but IBM was a giant. The partnership brought legitimacy and prestige. Doors opened. Microsoft developed MS-DOS, which became the standard operating system for IBM's machines. From there, the company exploded. But success brought friction. Gates and Paul Allen started having disagreements over hiring, over products, over control. In 1982, Paul was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He had to step back from the company. According to Paul, that is when Gates tried to take everything. That partnership, built on a bluff, would become the most ruthless monopoly in tech history. Paul Allen overheard a conversation he was not supposed to hear. It was 1982, and he had just been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. The illness forced him to step back from day-to-day operations at Microsoft. He was still a co-founder, still a co-owner, but he could not work the same hours. He could not maintain the same pace. And Bill Gates saw an opportunity. According to Allen, Gates was scheming behind closed doors to dilute his shares, to reduce Paul's ownership stake while he was sick and vulnerable. Allen would later describe it as mercenary opportunism. Gates remembered the situation differently, but the damage was done. Paul left his position as vice chairman, but he managed to keep his co-ownership and his seat on the board. The friendship never fully recovered. That pattern of seeing weakness and exploiting it was not isolated. By the mid-1980s, Microsoft had released Windows, an operating system that would eventually dominate the personal computer market. The company went public in 1986, flooding Gates with the capital needed to expand into every corner of the tech world. Windows 3.1, released in 1991, sold over 3 million copies in its first 2 months. Microsoft became the most popular operating system on the planet. But inside the company, employees described a different environment. Witnesses reported that Gates would berate staff during meetings, forcing them to defend their proposals until he was satisfied or until they broke. It was not collaboration. It was dominance. And then came the antitrust case. In 1998, the U.S. Department of Justice accused Microsoft of using its monopoly to crush competitors, Apple, Netscape, IBM, and Sun. The government argued that Microsoft had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by bundling Internet Explorer with Windows. making it nearly impossible for rival browsers to compete. Gates was forced to give a deposition. The video was played in court. A federal judge, watching Gates answer questions, laughed out loud. Legal analysts described his responses as evasive and non-responsive. He deflected. He claimed not to understand basic terms. He argued over the definition of words like market and concerned. In April 2000, a federal court ruled that Microsoft had violated antitrust law and ordered the company broken into two separate units. Gates stepped down as CEO, replaced by Steve Ballmer. He later told CNBC that the antitrust case was a distraction, that it was why he screwed up Windows Mobile. But the breakup never happened. An appeals court reversed the order in 2001. Microsoft settled with the government, accepting restrictions but avoiding dissolution. Gates had survived. The company had survived. But his reputation did not. And during all of this, there was something else happening. Something that would not become public for years. In 2006, Gates sent an email to a female Microsoft employee after she gave a presentation. He asked her to dinner. The phrasing was awkward, and the woman felt uncomfortable. She chose not to respond. In 2007, he sent emails to a different employee, a mid-level woman at Microsoft, asking to meet outside of work. The messages were flagged. In 2008, two Microsoft executives, Brad Smith and Lisa Bramell, confronted Gates directly. They told him the emails were inappropriate and that they had to stop. Gates agreed. But it was not just employees who had to be managed. It was the entire legal system. The breakup order should have ended Microsoft as it existed. In April 2000, a federal court declared the company an illegal monopoly and ordered it split into two separate entities. One would own the operating system, the other would handle applications. It was the corporate equivalent of dismantling Standard Oil. By June 2001, an appeals court reversed the decision, and Microsoft stayed intact. The settlement imposed restrictions, oversight, and compliance requirements, but no structural dissolution. The company survived. Gates survived. He stepped down as chief executive officer, saying he wanted to focus on other things. That same year, he launched the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with an initial endowment of $28 billion. The transformation was immediate. The ruthless monopolist became the world's greatest philanthropist. The man who had crushed competitors and evaded antitrust regulators was now the face of global health, education, and climate solutions. By the early 2000s, the Gates Foundation was spending over $1 billion annually. Gates announced plans to increase that to $9 billion per year by 2026. The foundation became the second largest funder of the World Health Organization, behind only the United States government. That level of funding brought influence, unprecedented control over public health discussions, policy priorities, and global vaccination campaigns. While Gates was building his humanitarian image, he was also building a different kind of network. In January 2011, Gates traveled to Manhattan and met Jeffrey Epstein for the first time. This was after Epstein had been sentenced in 2008 to 13 months for soliciting prostitution from underage girls. Gates visited Epstein's townhouse at least 3 times between 2011 and 2013. Employees from the Gates Foundation also met with Epstein during this period, discussing a proposed charitable fund that would be backed by Gates Foundation money. The plan never materialized. In 2013, Gates rode on Epstein's private plane. A spokesperson later said, Gates was not aware it was Epstein's plane. When asked about the meetings years later, Gates told PBS there was nothing, absolutely nothing new on that, and that because Epstein was dead, you always had to be careful. Melinda Gates met Epstein once. She later told CBS Mornings that she did not like that he had met with Jeffrey Epstein, and that she had voiced her concerns to Bill at the time. But the meetings continued. At the same time, the foundation was quietly funding media. $320 million in grants went to news organizations, journalism schools, and press associations. CNN, NBC, The Guardian, BBC, and Le Monde received support, enough funding to shape coverage, influence narratives, and help ensure the philanthropist image remained untouchable. For nearly a decade, it worked. Then, in July 2019, someone sent a letter to the Microsoft board, and once the facade cracked, people started asking what else he had been hiding. The letter arrived in July 2019. A Microsoft engineer wrote to the company's board. A letter reached the directors, alleging that she had a sexual relationship with Bill Gates that lasted several years, beginning around the year 2000. Nearly 2 decades earlier, she was coming forward now. The board did not ignore it. They formed a committee, and they hired an outside law firm to investigate. The inquiry was quiet, internal, but it was moving forward. And then, in August 2019, 1 month after the letter was sent, Gates appeared in an interview and was asked about Jeffrey Epstein. He said clearly he and Epstein had no business relationship or friendship. 2 months later, the New York Times published a detailed investigation. It described multiple meetings at Epstein's townhouse, Gates Foundation employees discussing charitable funds with a convicted sex offender, and rides on Epstein's private plane. The timeline did not match Gates's denial. A Gates spokesperson responded with a statement, saying over time Gates and his team realized Epstein's capabilities and ideas were not legitimate, and all contact with Epstein was discontinued. The statement did not answer when that realization happened, or why it took multiple meetings over multiple years. By late 2019, the Microsoft board's investigation into the engineer's letter was still ongoing. Some board members had reportedly concluded it was no longer appropriate for Gates to remain a director. In March 2020, Gates resigned from the Microsoft board. He also stepped down from the Berkshire Hathaway board. The public statement cited his desire to focus on philanthropy. The board investigation had not concluded. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're finding this investigation eye-opening, hit that like button right now. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Are you in the United States, Europe, Latin America, Asia? Let us know. We're building a global community here that questions the narratives we're fed, and I want to see just how far this message is reaching. Like, comment your location, and let's keep going. A spokesperson for Gates acknowledged that there had been an affair almost 20 years ago which ended amicably. The statement added, Bill's choice to step down from the board was unrelated to this issue. The board saw it differently. 14 months later, in May 2021, Bill and Melinda Gates announced their divorce after 27 years of marriage. The statement was brief and vague. It said the relationship was irretrievably broken. The speculation began immediately. Was it the affair from 2000? Was it the Epstein meetings? Was it something else entirely? Melinda did not speak publicly about it for nearly a year. Then, in a March 2022, she sat down for an interview with CBS Mornings. The host asked directly about Epstein. Melinda's answer was clear. I did not like that he'd had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, no. She said she met Epstein once and knew immediately she did not want Bill continuing contact. She voiced her concerns. The host pressed, was that a factor in the divorce? It's not one thing, Melinda said. It was many things, but Epstein was part of it. She confirmed that much. The facade had cracked. The polished image, the philanthropist, the humanitarian, the man saving the world, was fracturing in real time. And the public started asking a question that should have been asked years earlier. What else had he been hiding? Today, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation spends nearly $6 billion annually on global health, education, and climate initiatives. Gates has pledged to increase that to $9 billion by the end of this decade. He has announced plans to give away $200 billion over his lifetime. with the majority going to programs in Africa. On paper, it is the largest philanthropic commitment in history, but his personal net worth has more than doubled since 2000. The foundation is the second largest funder of the World Health Organization, surpassed only by the United States government. That funding gives Gates significant influence over global health policy, over what diseases get prioritized, which vaccines get developed, and how resources are allocated across continents. No other private individual holds that kind of power over international public health. And then there is the land. Gates owns 269,000 acres of farmland across 18 states. He is the largest private farmland owner in America. The purchases were made quietly through shell companies and subsidiaries, including Cascade Investment LLC and other entities, designed to obscure ownership. Much of the land was acquired during the COVID-19 pandemic, when property values dropped and most people were locked in their homes. When journalists discovered the acquisitions and asked why, Gates' team called it a good investment. But Gates has also been vocal about transforming agriculture. He has invested heavily in synthetic meat companies, including Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. He has promoted lab-grown proteins as the future of food. He has co-financed genetically modified crop experiments. Owning the land gives him control. What gets grown, how it is produced, who works there, what gets sold. But the question that still hasn't been answered, the one that cuts through all the philanthropy, all the media funding, all the carefully managed public appearances, is this. Why did Bill Gates keep meeting with Jeffrey Epstein? Not once. Not by accident. At least 3 times over a span of years after Epstein's conviction was public knowledge, employees from the Gates Foundation were involved in discussions about a charitable fund. Gates flew on Epstein's plane. What was discussed in those meetings? What did Epstein offer that was valuable enough for Gates to risk his reputation by association? Why continue after 2011, after the world knew exactly who Epstein was? The New York Times reported that 6 current and former employees at Microsoft and the Gates Foundation described a pattern, saying, Gates on occasion pursued women in the workplace. The 2006 email, the 2007 messages, the 2008 confrontation by executives telling him to stop, and in 2019, a letter from an engineer alleged a years-long relationship. Gates' spokesperson acknowledged one affair, called it amicable, and said it ended 20 years ago. But the Microsoft board's investigation led some members to conclude Gates should no longer serve as a director. He resigned.